The Galactic Council chambers were silent as the verdict was announced. The ruling was swift, spoken with the cold authority of those who had long considered themselves above all other species. The decision had been inevitable. Humanity's presence in the cosmos had been a nuisance, but one man had become an outright problem. A single Navy SEAL, a remnant of an extinct military force, had humiliated them too many times. This was not just about vengeance, it was about control. For years, the Council had sent mercenaries, bounty hunters, and elite assassins to hunt him down. None had returned. Some vanished without a trace. Others sent fragmented distress signals before their communications were severed entirely. The Council had tried diplomacy, deception, and brute force, but nothing had worked. The message had been made clear: this human was not prey. He was the predator. And so, the Council abandoned subtlety. They summoned Kavor. The Warlord towered over the assembled delegates, his heavy exoskeletal armor shifting with the sheer size of his frame. His species, the Vorgoth, had been bred for war long before the Council had unified the galaxy. He had never known fear, never been bested in battle, and had never left a mission incomplete. Unlike the mercenaries before him, Kavor did not view this assignment as a game. He saw it for what it was, a test of dominance. He accepted the task without hesitation. A lone human, no matter how skilled, was still just a human. The fact that he had survived this long was an anomaly, one that Kavor would soon correct. Days later, his warship cut through the void of space, descending upon a remote, barren world at the edge of known space. Sparse vegetation clung to cracked soil, the sky overhead dim with a permanent overcast of storm-racked clouds. The planet had no official name, merely a string of coordinates buried in the Council's classified files. Here, David Kane had chosen to disappear. Kavor stood at the ship's ramp as it extended toward the planet's surface, his troops forming a disciplined line behind him. His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Tucker, adjusted the targeting array on his wrist gauntlet. The human's hideout is 2 kilometers east. A fortified structure, but nothing we cannot breach. Kavor said nothing. He had no interest in the details. The outcome was inevitable, and planning was a waste of time. With a motion of his clawed hand, he signaled for the advance. The Warlord expected resistance. He had anticipated an ambush, sniper fire, or at least some sign that the human was aware of their arrival. Yet as his forces moved through the terrain, the world remained still. No alarms, no movement, no challenge. It was insulting. They reached the structure, a weathered bunker, its exterior scarred by time and exposure. The door hung slightly ajar, an invitation or a warning. Kavor did not hesitate. He strode forward, stepping past the threshold. His warriors followed. The silence was absolute. The interior was dark, save for the flickering glow of a single console in the center of the room. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with alien technology, scavenged weapons, and crude maps of surrounding territories. This was not just a shelter, it was a war room. A hunter's den. Kavor turned toward the console. A transmission was playing. He recognized the voice immediately. I was wondering when they'd send someone who mattered. The human's voice was calm, almost amused. Kavor narrowed his eyes. He had heard many make such boasts before, and none had lived long enough to repeat them. I hope they told you the truth, King continued. That you're not the first. That you won't be the last. Kavor's patience wore thin. He gestured to one of his soldiers, who stepped forward and attempted to disable the transmission. The second the warrior touched the console, the floor beneath them erupted. Explosives precisely placed and expertly concealed detonated in a calculated sequence. The blast did not kill them outright. Kane was too smart for that. Instead, it sent the warriors sprawling, disoriented, and momentarily vulnerable. A heartbeat later, the walls came alive with automated gunfire. Kavor reacted instantly, throwing himself behind cover as his men scrambled for safety. The Warlord bared his fangs in a snarl. This was no ordinary human strategy. This was a predator thinning the herd. The transmission continued, Kane's voice unhurried despite the chaos. Don't take it personally. I don't hate you. You were just stupid enough to come here. Then the transmission cut out, and the bunker plunged into total darkness. Kavor rose to his feet, his enhanced vision cutting through the gloom. Several of his warriors were down, others struggling to recover. He reached for his communicator to issue orders, only to realize his signal was gone. Jamming tech. Primitive but effective. Kavor's lip curled in a mixture of irritation and grudging respect. It was rare to encounter an opponent who understood the nuances of asymmetrical warfare. A movement flickered at the edge of his vision. He turned sharply, raising his weapon, but it was too late. A shadow moved faster than his reflexes, and one of his warriors let out a sharp, guttural sound before collapsing. Kavor glimpsed a blade flash before disappearing into the darkness. The human was here. The air grew heavy with tension. Kavor's remaining troops tightened their formation, their weapons sweeping the room. Then, from somewhere unseen, Kane's voice emerged once more, softer this time. You should have stayed home. And then the killing began. Kavor did not need to see his warriors die to know they were doomed. He could hear it. The muted, wet sound of a blade sliding free from flesh. The brief, strangled gasps as throats were cut before a cry could leave the lips. The heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor, one after another. The human was not fighting them. He was hunting them. A soldier to his left pivoted sharply, his rifle sweeping the room. A second later, something small and metallic clinked against his armor. Kavor had just enough time to recognize the shape before the explosion ripped the warrior apart. Smoke filled the chamber, the acrid scent of burning flesh mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Kavor dropped low, his instincts guiding him as he rolled away from the blast zone. His species was bred for war, but even he knew this was not a battlefield. This was a graveyard in the making. A movement flickered at the edge of his vision. He turned, swinging his gauntlet fist, but hit nothing but air. Another of his warriors collapsed, a knife buried deep in the juncture between his shoulder plates. Kane moved like a ghost, striking, retreating, disappearing into the darkness before the Vorgoth could react. Kavor clenched his jaw. He had underestimated the human. Rising to his full height, he activated the secondary layer of his visor, switching to thermal vision. At once, the room shifted into a spectrum of heat signatures, the bodies of his fallen glowing dimly. His remaining warriors, fewer than he wanted to count, stood in tight formation, scanning the shadows. And then he saw it, a flicker of movement, low to the ground, fast. Kane. Kavor moved before the human could strike. He lunged, his claws slashing through the air, but Kane twisted at the last moment, evading the strike with unnatural reflexes. The Warlord's gauntlet scraped against the bunker wall, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Kane used the moment of distraction to strike. He moved in close, too close for Kavor to bring his full strength to bear, and drove a blade toward the Warlord's exposed side. Kavor barely deflected the attack, twisting his body to absorb the force with his armor. Even so, he felt the edge of the blade scrape against his exoskeleton. Kane didn't hesitate. The moment his attack failed, he was already moving again, vanishing into the wreckage of the bunker. Kavor exhaled sharply, his breath a low growl of frustration. This was no ordinary warrior. The human wasn't just strong, wasn't just fast. He understood the rhythm of battle, the flow of movement that separated killers from the dead. And for the first time in his long, blood-stained career, Kavor felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. He would not allow it to take root. He was Vorgoth. He was war incarnate. Snapping out of his momentary hesitation, he barked an order in his native tongue. His warriors regrouped, fanning out in a more controlled formation. Kane had the advantage in stealth and maneuverability, but Kavor had something the human lacked: overwhelming force. Another order, and his soldiers launched thermal charges into the surrounding corridors. The explosions lit up the darkness, stripping Kane of his cover. If the human wanted to fight from the shadows, then Kavor would burn those shadows away. A flicker of motion, Kane darted out of hiding, forced into the open by the flames. Kavor saw him clearly now, A lean figure in dark, battered armor, his face concealed behind a tactical visor. No insignia, no markings, just death in human form. The Warlord reacted instantly, leveling his plasma cannon. Kane moved before he fired, diving forward instead of retreating. A bold move. The plasma round blasted the wall behind him, but Kane was already too close. He slid low, beneath Kavor's reach, and drove a compact explosive against the Warlord's knee joint. The detonation was immediate. Kavor roared in pain as his leg buckled, molten metal searing into his flesh. He swung wildly, but Kane had already vanished again, melting back into the battlefield. Kavor braced himself against the wall, pain lancing through his body. He had never been wounded like this, never been forced into a position where his own strength worked against him. His remaining warriors hesitated, looking to their leader for orders. He knew what they were thinking. If the great Kavor could be wounded, could he be killed? The doubt in their eyes enraged him. He forced himself upright, the damaged servos in his armor whining under the strain. His vision blurred with pain, but his resolve hardened. The human was dangerous, yes, but he was still just a man. Kavor had fought armies, had raised entire planets. He would not be defeated by a single warrior, no matter how skilled. With a final, guttural command, he ordered his soldiers forward. The chase had ended. It was time for the hunt to begin. Kane was waiting. The bunker's remains funneled into a narrow passage, leading toward the planet's surface. Kavor recognized the trap for what it was. The human was leading them somewhere he had prepared in advance. The Warlord did not care. He advanced, ignoring the ache in his leg, his focus sharpening. If Kane wanted a final battle, he would get one. The passage led to a wide, open canyon, its walls steep and jagged. The storm clouds above had thickened, casting the battlefield in shifting shadows. Wind howled through the ravine, carrying the scent of blood and smoke. And there, standing alone in the center, was Kane. His weapons were drawn, but his posture was relaxed, almost casual. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying the Warlord. Then, he reached up and removed his visor, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that burned with something Kavor had not expected. Not arrogance, not fear, amusement. The human smiled. Took you long enough. Kavor let out a low, rumbling growl. His warriors spread out behind him, forming a semicircle around their prey. They had him surrounded, outnumbered, and yet, Kavor could not shake the feeling that it was they who were trapped. Kane rolled his shoulders, loosening his stance. You ready? Kavor bared his fangs. The battle would end here, one way or another. Without another word, he charged. Kavor surged forward, his massive frame kicking up dust and debris as he closed the distance in a single, thundering stride. His plasma blade ignited, crackling with blue fire as he brought it down in a strike meant to split the human in half. But Kane was already moving. He pivoted at the last second, the blade passing inches from his chest as he twisted around Kavor's exposed flank. His knife lashed out, the edge flashing toward the Warlord's damaged knee. Kavor snarled and slammed his elbow backward, forcing Kane to disengage before the blade could make contact. The human slid back a few feet, light on his feet, eyes sharp with calculation. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't eager. He was waiting, watching. Kavor ground his teeth, feeling the dull throb of pain where the explosive had wrecked his armor. The wound slowed him, even if he refused to acknowledge it. He had fought through worse. He would crush this insect, even if it meant doing so with his bare hands. His warriors remained on the canyon's edges, forming an unbreakable perimeter, their weapons trained on the lone human. But Kavor raised a hand, halting them. This was his kill. Kane smirked at the gesture. Good, he said. I was worried you'd let them take all the fun. Kavor lunged again, his plasma blade sweeping in a wide arc, but Kane dropped low, rolling beneath the strike. He came up fast, firing a burst from his sidearm straight into the Warlord's chest. The round struck armor, sparking against reinforced plating, but one shot found a weakened joint, slipping through the cracks. Kavor barely flinched. Pain was an afterthought. He swung again, this time feinting left before driving his fist toward Kane's midsection. The human twisted, but Kavor anticipated it, catching him with a glancing blow that sent him staggering back. Kane recovered instantly, but Kavor saw the brief flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes, a reminder that brute force still had its place in this fight. The Warlord pressed his advantage, closing in fast, his strikes relentless. Kane dodged, parried, countered when he could, but Kavor kept the pressure high, forcing the human to retreat, forcing him to react. A mistake was coming. It had to. Then Kane did something unexpected. He stopped. Instead of dodging, instead of running, he planted his feet and met Kavor's next strike head-on. The Warlord's blade came down, but Kane sidestepped at the last moment, shifting inside Kavor's reach. The human's hands clamped down on the Warlord's wrist, using his own momentum against him. Kavor felt himself pulled forward, off balance. And then Kane drove his knife into the Warlord's wounded leg. Kavor roared, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. He lashed out, but Kane was already gone, his blade slicing free as he rolled clear. The Warlord dropped to one knee, pain surging through his nerves like fire. His leg, already damaged, threatened to give out entirely. Kane exhaled, flicking blood from his blade. "You feel that?" he asked. "That's what losing feels like." Kavor refused to accept it. With a growl, he pushed himself upright, forcing his body to obey. He would not fall. He would not. The first shot rang out. One of his warriors collapsed. A clean hole punched through its skull. Then another, and another. Kavor snapped his gaze to the canyon walls, his vision blurring with disbelief. His warriors were dying. Not by Kane's hand, but by something else. Something unseen. Snipers. Kavor's breath hitched as realization struck. This had never been a duel. This had never been a test of strength or skill. It had been a trap. Kane watched him, expression unreadable. "You brought numbers," he said. "So did I." Another shot. Another body. Kavor's remaining warriors broke formation, seeking cover, but there was none. The canyon, the open ground. Kane had chosen this battlefield for a reason. The Warlord had walked his entire army into the perfect kill zone. Kavor's grip tightened around his weapon, his blood pounding in his ears. He could still fight. He could still. Kane moved. Before Kavor could react, the human was on him, moving with precision, with finality. He struck fast, slipping inside the Warlord's reach once more. His knife drove upward, finding the gap beneath Kavor's jaw. The Warlord's body jerked. His vision wavered. Kane leaned in, voice a whisper. "They never come back." With a final brutal twist, he tore the blade free. Kavor staggered, his knees buckling. He fell, his body crashing to the ground, the weight of his armor shaking the earth beneath him. His vision darkened. His warriors were gone. His mission had failed. As the last of his strength bled away, he heard Kane's voice one last time, distant and cold. "Tell the Council I said hi." Then everything went black. The Galactic Council received the transmission hours later. It was brief. A single, static-laced message sent from Kavor's own warship. No words. No demands. Just a live feed of the Warlord's lifeless body, slumped against his own throne. Panic rippled through the council chambers. The room, once filled with the confident voices of galactic rulers, was now suffocated by silence. They had sent their best. They had sent a force meant to overwhelm, to crush, to annihilate. And once again, none had returned. Some whispered of abandoning the hunt. Others spoke of mobilizing fleets, of waging open war against this lone, unrelenting human. But there was fear now, not just of Kane himself, but the question no one dared speak aloud. If one man could do this, what could an army of them do? The transmission ended, and somewhere, across the vast expanse of space, David Kane disappeared once more.